Okay, today we're still in the Gospel of John, obviously, and we are dealing with the 6 trials of Jesus. Now, we've been taking this rather slowly, and rightly so. The very purpose that Jesus came was to die on the cross to accomplish the salvation of mankind. So we've been looking at the things that happened in the garden, and then we looked at the arrest of Jesus and how he handled that. And it's very impressive to see how Jesus handled every stage of this situation. So now we're down to where they have arrested him. They took him back in before the high priest. Now, keep in mind, the Roman government will be the one that puts him to death. But the only reason that they will put him to death is because the Jewish government is demanding it. And we will see it as we go through this trial here. So the people that came out and arrested Jesus were both Romans, the Roman army, and the Jewish army. And they took Jesus in to the high priest to start the trial in there. And that's what we're dealing with now, is these 6 trials that Jesus will go through in this night. He's going to go up first to Annas, then to Caiaphas. Now, Annas was the fake high priest. He was the high priest that the Romans had set up, and they said he is the high priest. But the Jewish high priest, the real high priest, the one that is according to the law of Moses, was Caiaphas. So they take him into Annas first. Annas is the older man. I suppose it was somehow to honor him in some way or another. So he's going to be taken into Annas, and then Annas is going to send him to Caiaphas to get the official condemnation. Caiaphas will then condemn him and send him to Pilate. Now, Pilate, thank you, Rod. Pilate is a Roman governor. And Pilate, then they're going to take him to Pilate because Pilate's the one that has authority to crucify him. Pilate is not going to want to do that. So Pilate, through a little manipulation, trying to get out of it, sends him to Herod. Now Herod is the governor, Roman governor, over Pilate. And so he's going to send him to his big boss. Herod is going to play around with Jesus a little bit, and then he doesn't want to have anything to do with him, so he's going to send him back to Pilate for another trial. Pilate is going to say, I don't find any reason to kill him, so he's going to send him back to the Jews and say, now look, I've looked at this, and there's no reason for death. So he'll send him back to the Jews, and the Jews will say, yes, he must die, and they'll send him back to Pilate. And so that's the reason we're going from being, back and forth in these situations, and he's going to go through 6 of these tonight. Now, we're going to, once again, take the study in this way. We're going to look here at what John says. Then we will look at Matthew. Then we'll look at Mark. In other words, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell about these things. And so I'm going to try to give us a synopsis of what they all say. Now, they all say exactly the same thing. And the only thing that we can look for is that one of them may tell us a little bit more than the other one. As we've illustrated before, if you have 4 witnesses to an automobile accident, the police will interview all 4. And all 4 will tell the same story. They'll say this car ran the stoplight and hit this car. It'll all tell the same story. But one may say, this car was really going fast. He's probably going 75 miles an hour. And he ran the stoplight. Well, that's a little bit more information. And so we're going to kind of look at all of them to try to get the information here to see how Jesus went through this night. So now, let's pick up the story, and let's now put our radars up to say, where are we? All right, starting right here, Jesus has just been arrested. They have taken him in to Annas, who is the fake governor. And Annas now is going to listen to him. So, it says, Annas says, I'm going to go fast. In fact, we've already looked at this before. He started asking him about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus just refused to talk to him. And he said, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always met, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said. Indeed, they know what I said. In other words, don't ask me, ask them. Call in the witnesses. Now, when he had said these things, then they reached up, some of the officers, and slapped him and said, do you answer the high priest like this? And Jesus came back and said, well, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. In other words, if I spoke evil, when I told the high priest to call in the witnesses, because everything I have taught publicly, then bear witness of me. But now, if I didn't sin when I asked that question, why do you strike me? And obviously, the question is, they were mad. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So now we're going to take the next step. Here the father-in-law is going to send him to the son-in-law, who is the real high priest. So now he goes there, and he led him away to Caiaphas. Now Matthew tells this. It said, now the chief priest and the elders and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. All right, they take him down to Caiaphas. Now keep in mind, Caiaphas should be the most holy man in all of the Jewish nation. He is the high priest of the Jews according to the law of Moses. So now Caiaphas calls in the chief priest. Now these would be the pillars, the head priest, the one with the most influence in the Jewish nation, and all the council. Now this would be the Sanhedrin, Jewish Sanhedrin, which was their supreme court. It was composed of 70 different men. And they all now start to seek out false testimony. Now how can we find false testimony so we can put this guy to death? So they started calling in witnesses to lie. And the problem is that the witnesses came in and their testimony contradicted each other. So when that happens, you had to throw it out then. But it says, but at last 2 witnesses came in. And they said, we heard this fellow say, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. Bang! This is magic. Now, we're going to get Jesus. So now we've got the testimony. What is the testimony? We heard him say he was going to destroy this temple. Now, he didn't say that. In fact, they didn't even say that. They said there, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. He didn't do that. Now, what did he do? Well, back in John 2, he went in and they were challenging him and asking him about his authority. By what authority do you do these things? Why do you... Now, his authority was his miracles. And so he goes to the great miracle. Now, there's one miracle. Keep this in mind. All the way through the teachings of Jesus, they would come up and they would ask him, after Jesus had raised the dead, They weren't impressed with a little old thing like that. After he had walked on water, that's nothing. After he had gone into a city and healed everybody in town, these are just normal miracles. We want to see a big one. So they would ask him, show us a sign from heaven. Show us a miracle or a sign that it's obviously, it comes straight out of heaven. And it can't be any other way. And Jesus would tell them, look, I'm doing all of these miracles to prove to you I'm the Son of God. And if you're wanting one great, gigantic miracle coming from heaven, there'll only be one. And that one will be, if you kill me, I will raise myself in 3 days. And they would, wow. Now, all the way through his teaching, Matthew 16, chapter 1, verse 1 is famous for that. And so he would talk about his resurrection. My resurrection will be the one gigantic miracle that the human mind will not be able to comprehend. And so he kept telling them that. And one day in the temple, the priest came to him after he had shaken up the temple in John 2, and they asked him, well, what sign? And he said, well, now since Jesus had gone in, he had cast the money changers out, he had run the crooks out of the temple. The high priest and them came and said, by what authority do you do this? So we got all this. How can you take advantage of this temple? And Jesus looked at him and said, if you destroy this temple, I will raise it in 3 days. That's all he said. Now, they jumped to the conclusion that he was saying, go ahead and destroy this temple of God. Go ahead and destroy this building. And if you will destroy it, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. But in that same chapter, it said that's not what he's talking about. He was talking about his own temple. When they said, by what authority, he said, here's my authority. You destroy the temple that I live in. You destroy my body, you kill me, and I'll raise it in 3 days. I'll come back from the dead. That's what you got. Now, they're twisting this all around. And now then, they're making it sound like Jesus came and his intentions in somehow or another is to be like a terrorist, and he's going to blow up this temple. He's going to destroy the temple of God. Now that would be bad. So they said, here's what he was talking about. Now, that wasn't it. They pointed it out back there. But the high priest rose and said, do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But he kept silent. They say, why do you keep silent? Have you ever been in a situation where you're talking with somebody and for 3 years you've been arguing with them about something? And in 3 years, they've never answered you. They've always told the story in the wrong way. And for 3 years, you've tried to convince them, but these people will not be convinced. And finally, they come up and they say, would you tell me this? And you just look at them and shake your head. That's what he's done. For 3 years, they've been arguing about this. And for 3 years, they haven't listened. So they bring it up again, and Jesus kept silent. The high priest said, "Do you answer nothing? What if these men testify against you?" He kept silent. Finally, the high priest did what he has the authority to do. He said, "I put you under oath by the living God." Now, that's the same as if you were taken into court and they ask you to stand up and testify. And no. Now, keep in mind, in our culture today, in our laws, you can take the Fifth Amendment, as we see people do. But back there, they didn't have any Fifth Amendment rights. You had to answer if the court put you under oath. And the court said, "You will answer." That's what this high priest is doing. He's saying, "I am putting you under oath. So from here on, whatever you say is under oath. So now you answer me." Okay. The first question was, "Tell us if you're the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus said unto him, "It is as you said." No further explanation. Yes. It's just like you said. I am the Son of God. He said, "But nevertheless, I say to you that hereafter, after this trial is all over and everything, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power," that would be heavenly power, God, "and coming on the clouds of heaven." After all this is over and you put me to death, you will see me again. Then the high priest tore his clothes, which was a normal way for the Jews to do. It wasn't an unusual thing. It's like if I were trying to get something here out of somebody, and finally they answered in such a way that I can't believe it. I go, "Oh!" You'd say, Lowell hit himself in the head. Now, if you write that down in a book, it might sound bad. That Lowell was saying this and this, and finally the guy said this, and Lowell hit himself in the head. Well, you understand that when I do that, it is an extreme measure of me saying, I've lost it. I mean, there's nothing else to say. That's what the high priest is doing. He reaches up, grabs his clothes, and rips them, and tears his clothes, which is a way of saying, I'm exhausted, we've had it, we've asked this man something, and this man has claimed to be the Son of God. I can't take any more. That's all I can take. He claims to be the Son of God. So he tore his clothes. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look now, you've heard his blasphemy. So now the high priest is rendering judgment. No use bringing in any more people. No use asking any more questions. You yourself have heard him blaspheme. He says he is the Son of God. Before they've charged him, he said, that makes you equal with God, which is right. This man is a blasphemer. This man claims to be divine. He claims to be God. So he tells everybody, all of you've heard it. All the Sanhedrin, all of you Jews, you've heard him with his own lips commit blasphemy. Now, according to the law of Moses, which they were using, Blasphemy carries the death penalty. So you should be put to death if you're a blasphemer. So they said, you've heard it. What do you think? They answered and said, he is deserving of death. Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who struck you? So now to show their intimidation, they'd spit on him, slap him and say, show us you're the Christ. Show us you're divine. Tell me what my name is. The guy just got through slapping you. So now Jesus is starting to go through all of this intimidation. All of this horrible, horrible stuff. Now remember, later on it will talk about that he endured the shame. That's what this is starting to tell us. We're beginning to see the shame that Jesus had to endure. But this is only the first step in the whole process of enduring the shame. Now, as we turn to Mark, he tells the same thing. So we'll not be labored on Mark. See, they bore false witness against him. And then you get down there, they ask him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? He said, I am. And then they tore their clothes. It's the same story, see, that Mark tells. Then Luke tells us again about this. And it said, he said to them, in other words, they asked him, are you the Christ? And he said, if I tell you, you'll know my means believe. And if I ask you, you will no means answer me or let me go. So this adds a little bit to what Jesus said. Jesus said, it is as you said, we read a minute ago. And then he said, if I tell you and explain it to you, you won't believe me. And if I ask you, see, any questions, you won't answer me. Or you won't let me go in any case. So then they come back and ask him, are you the Son of God? You rightly say that I am. So that's when they said, what further testimony do we need? So Luke goes ahead and tells us this. We just got through reading right there. So they say, now what further need do we need of testimony? We've heard it out of his own mouth. So now, the Jews say, Jesus will be put to death. All right, that second trial ended. And the way it ended was, then Jesus was condemned by Caiaphas. We just read that. And then he was sent by Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin, the Jewish law, to Pilate. Now, the reason they sent him to Pilate is that the Jews were living in the country of Israel, which was in the territory of the Roman government. So, it would be something like the state of Washington, that we have our own trials, we have our own judges, but we are subject to the federal law and Supreme Court. And finally, it is the Supreme Court that will make the decisions, and they have the right to tell us yes or no. So, if the state of Washington says, this man is guilty of murder and we sentence him to death, well, they don't take the guy out and put him to death. They start through trials and work themselves up, and finally it goes by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court finally makes the ultimate decision. Now that's what it is here. The Jews have condemned him. He's worthy of death, but they don't have authority to crucify him. If they take him out and put him on a cross and crucify him, the Roman government will come in and arrest them and destroy their organization. So they have to go through Rome. So they have pronounced the death sentence on him, and now they're going to send him to Pilate. So immediately in the morning, this is interesting, all this happened during the night. During the night, but now in the morning, while the chief priest then had this consultation and so forth, and they led him and delivered him to Pilate. So now he comes to Pilate. Well, here's an interesting thing I want you to think about. We all know a little bit about Pilate, and we really don't know anything good about him. He's the man that is ultimately going to crucify Jesus. He's the guy that most of us remember as finally taking water and washing his hands and saying, I wash my hands of this mess, and take him and crucify him. And we say, well, that was a cowardly act. But let's remove that for the time being. I want you to go back and I want you to think about Pilate. The reason you do that is because I kind of like Pilate. Pilate seemed to me like a real nice guy and a real fair man. Yep, just like all Romans, he did horrible things. I don't agree with the outcome. But notice what Pilate did as we go into all this. Now, the first Roman trial before Pilate came to this. They brought him down there and delivered him to Pilate. Then Mark said, then Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered and said to him, it is as you say. In other words, yes. Yeah, it's just like you said. I am the king of the Jews. Now let's put that in perspective. In what sense was Jesus king of the Jews? Now, if you remember back in John 15, they tried to kidnap Jesus. John 7, wasn't it? They tried to kidnap Jesus to make him king. They said, we want you to be our king. They wanted to make him a king so he would gather together an army. And if Jesus got this army together, plus all the miracles that he was capable of doing, he could revolt against Rome and conquer Rome. And then the Jews would rule the world. So they're going to make him king. And he ran to the mountains to escape. No, not going to be king. But now then, he comes up here and they ask him, are you king of the Jews? And he said, yes, I am. Now, the way he was king of the Jews, as we will later learn, is he was not the king, physical king, the way they took it to start with. He is the king of the Jews in the sense of, if you go back to the Old Testament and you start out with especially the book of Isaiah, and there you find that within Israel, within the lineage of David, there's going to be a son that's born. And the kingdom will be upon his shoulders. He's going to be the ruler of this government. And on it goes, telling about the Christ. That the end result will be the Christ will be the king. Now, as we study the Bible, we understand and know this. Jesus died on the cross, and they all looked at him as the enemy of mankind. He was an enemy of Rome because he claimed to be a king. And the Roman says Caesar's our king. And if you are about to act like you're a king, if you're going to declare yourself a king and declare war against Caesar, we're against you. The Jews hated him, and they didn't want him as a king. So he was going to die. But when he died, he rose from the dead. He rose from the dead, and he came back and showed himself alive. Then he ascended up into heaven to sit down at the right hand of God. And when he sat down at the right hand of God, he became the King of Kings. The king of his kingdom, which is his spiritual kingdom. Today we know it as the church. And so he's going to be the king. Yes, I am. So he said that. Now the chief priests accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. So these chief priests are standing there, and they keep yak, talking to Pilate. See, these are the guys who used to be his judge in the other trial. Now then, they're the witnesses. Then Pilate asked him again, saying, do you answer nothing? Seeing how many things they testify against you. But Jesus answered nothing, so Pilate marveled. Now, why isn't Jesus answering anything? Well, we learned a little while ago. Jesus explained, he said, if I answer it, you won't believe me. If I ask you a question, you won't answer it. Doesn't make any difference what I say. It has no effect on you. So Pilate, when they come up here and they say these things, and you want me to answer them, I've tried for 3 years. They will not. They will not. So Jesus just doesn't answer. He just stays silent. He's not trying to be stubborn. He's frustrated. Nothing else he can do. And so then they lead him to Pilate, and he asks him, are you king of the Jews? And Pilate then finally comes to this conclusion. I find no fault in this man. So here's his judgment. Now the Jews say he's worthy of death. Pilate listens to the testimony and says, I find no fault in this man. Now the Jews, who are now the witnesses, they came back the more fierce, saying, now the Jews are getting madder and madder, meaner and meaner, and they said, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. Here, he's a troublemaker. He has stirred up all the people all the way through Israel. He has just stirred them all up, set everybody on edge. He's guilty of insurrection. Well, you know the answer to that. That he no more did that than the man in the moon could be there. Now, they led Jesus to Caiaphas to the praetorium. This is again to Pilate. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, and that they might eat the Passover. Now this is interesting, because when they lead him over to Pilate, they don't go into Pilate's office. Pilate has to come out to talk with them, because they didn't want to be defiled so they can eat the Passover that day. Now they should have eaten it at 6 o'clock last night, but obviously they were too busy. And so now they don't want to defile themselves, and so they won't go in, and they make Pilate come out. And so they tell Pilate, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. So he's an evildoer, just go ahead and judge him in there. Pilate then said, I find no fault in him. And then Pilate says, you take him and judge him according to your law. In other words, you guys are condemning him according to your law of blasphemy. I don't want to have anything to do with that. Now the Jews now make their stand and tell why Pilate has to do it. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. That's why, Pilate, it's your job. And that's where we'll close today. And next week we'll open with the next trial. Thank you.